And while no platforming in safe space has been criticised by commentators and has often been in the media of late, it is important to remember this, that UK law maintains stringent restrictions on incitement to racial and religious hatred, that our hate speech laws are seen by many as an untouchable area. So I think what we want to get to grips with in this session is, can we really blame students for being censorious, or are they simply copying the trends of wider society?
I completely reject the entire category of hate speech. And I'm always really surprised that so many people treat the category of hate speech seriously. You hear people having discussions like, is this hate speech, is that hate speech? And I'm always thinking, what are you doing? Why are you treating hate speech as some kind of measurable scientific category? To my mind, the category of hate speech is as ridiculous and as abominable, in fact, as the idea of thought crime. And my mission in life, or at least this afternoon, is to create a situation where people bristle and balk as much at the phrase hate speech as they do at the phrase thought crime. There are two reasons I reject the category of hate speech. The first is that this is an ideological invention. It is explicitly designed to repress the expression of certain ideas, and it does that to great effect. It is an ideological tool disguised as a moral good. And the second reason I reject the category of hate speech is because it encroaches into the realm of free communication in an extraordinary way, in a way that no other law or censor in modern times has done. Because it polices not only ideas, but also emotions, feelings. It is the definition of government overreach. It has all the ingredients of tyranny. So on the first point, the ideology of the category of hate speech, you can really see its ideological component if you look at the history of the modern idea of hate speech. Because after the Second World War, the keenest proponents for controls on hate speech were the Soviet Union. And you had all these international gatherings in the 1940s and 50s where people were drawing up international treaties and so on. And the Soviets were always pushing for the criminalization of hate speech, particularly fascistic and racist speech. They wanted international treaties to demonize and potentially criminalize hatred and incitement to hatred. And amazingly, the West actually resisted their demands. Eleanor Roosevelt was leading the Western camp for a period of time while these international treaties were being drawn up. And she said it would be extremely dangerous to outlaw hate speech because any criticisms of public or religious authorities might all too easily be described as incitement to hatred. Now, amazingly, the Soviets won. And in 1965, the UN Convention outlawed the following: ideas based on racial superiority. The key word there is ideas. From the outset, hate speech laws were about repressing ideas, obnoxious ideas, but nonetheless ideas. It is an ideological tool for the repression of ideas. And even worse than being an ideological tool, it's an extremely elastic one. It's extraordinary how unwieldy and arbitrary hate speech laws are and how much they have spread. So they've spread from criminalizing racial speech to criminalizing religious hatred. In Scandinavia, there are discussions to outlaw misogynistic speech. On campuses, they want to outlaw, or they no platform, transphobic speech. So hate speech restrictions spread and spread and spread. There's an unstoppable momentum because once you accept the originally Soviet idea that some forms of speech are so hateful they must be repressed, then there is no end to what you might potentially censor. Just to see how terrifying this is, in Sweden, a Christian pastor was given a 1-month suspended prison sentence for describing homosexuality as a tumor on society. Now, we might all think that's repulsive, but he believes that with every fiber of his being. He was imprisoned for expressing his beliefs. Brigitte Bardot has been fined €30,000 for describing the Islamic ritual slaughter of meat as barbaric. She believes that, really believes that. On campuses, you're not allowed to say that a person with a penis is a man. If you say that on campuses, they will accuse you of hate speech. This is the world we live in, folks. If you say a man is a man, you are accused of committing a hate speech crime. So the unstoppable logic is extraordinary. And students, I think, the students who try and clamp down on hate speech always present themselves as radicals, but actually they are the foot soldiers of a top-down, tyrannical attempt to repress the expression of ideas that started with the Soviet Union and was in the 60s and 70s embraced by Western powers. And then final point, the second point is the level of intervention the hate speech laws grant the authorities, which is that, yes, they suppress ideas, but they also police emotions. Hatred is an emotion. Might not be a bigger and clever emotion, but it is an emotion. And to invite the authorities or student unions or any other form of officialdom to police emotions is the definition of tyranny. We have to get serious about freedom of speech. It is unacceptable to repress the expression of ideas. It is unacceptable to repress the expression of hatred. And it is unacceptable to repress the expression of racism. The question posed here is hate speech free speech? I think we should say hate speech is a nonsense. There is only speech, and all speech should be free.
Brendan, let me ask you, I think the other two speakers have talked about this being a problem mainly with students, and I just want to know whether you think this is an emergence of, a sudden emergence of soft-hearted students, or is the problem bigger than that?
I think it's bigger than that. There's definitely something wrong with students. They've lost the plot, they've become soft, they're, you know, pathetic and weak, and not all of them, but the guys who run it. But I think they are an expression of a broader problem in society, which is a collapse of belief in freedom of speech and Enlightenment values and the robust individual and the value of moral autonomy, all those things which have been withering across society for 30, 40 or 50 years. It is not remotely surprising that you would end up with a generation of what we used to call puffs, but you're probably not allowed to say that anymore. You know, wimps. Are you allowed to say wimps? I don't know. So, you know, a new generation which is pretty pathetic. I think they are the end result of various different things. Parenting styles, anti-bullying initiatives at schools, the idea that your self-esteem is the most sacred thing in the world, and if anyone offends it, you have the right to shut them down or shout in their face. If you cultivate a culture in which autonomy is undermined and how you feel about your self-worth is sacralized above everything else, you are going to give rise to this kind of crap on campus. So I think we should definitely hold them responsible because they are still making a conscious decision to pass these policies and to no platform people like Mariam and others. But we also need to contextualize it within the decay of Western society.
Okay, great.
Yeah, in relation to what students can do to challenge censorship, it's always just worth remembering that freedom of speech is not something that can be given to you. Freedom of speech is something that you have, and you do, and you exercise. If you wait around for someone to say, over here you're allowed to say such and such, then you'll be waiting forever. So I think they just need to exercise their freedom of speech and bear the consequences that come along with that. If you're at a university which has banned Robin Thicke's song Blurred Lines, it is incumbent upon you to get a sound system and play Robin Thicke's Blurred Lines on a loop all day long. My favourite form of student censorship is some campuses, some student unions have banned the making of sexual noises in the student bar. When I was at university, if they banned the making of sexual noises, I can guarantee you everyone would be making sexual noises. It's a principled matter. You must make a sexual noise in the name of freedom of speech. So you challenge it by doing what they forbid you from doing, and then if you get in trouble, you build a campaign around that, you get media interest, you alert people to the fact that you are potentially being thrown off campus for having made a sexual noise, and that's what you do, I think. You don't wait for them to change. In relation to what hate speech laws exist or have been used, there are numerous examples. A student, 2 or 3 years ago, a student was imprisoned for 56 days for saying something racist on Twitter. This is the country we live in. People are imprisoned for 56 days for saying something. A member of a racist party was given an 8-month suspended prison sentence and community service for writing a blog post that contained the word wogs. This is the country we live in. People are fined for making jokes. After last year's truck disaster in Glasgow, when a truck killed some people on around Christmas time, the police visited the homes of people who tweeted jokes about that incident. There are numerous examples of hate speech laws being used to arrest, fine, and imprison people, and the lack of outrage about it today is really, really surprising. I'm hoping that in the future, historians will look back and be amazed that people tolerated the existence of this kind of legislation. But having said that, I do think censorship is also being outsourced by the state to rising numbers of private groups, student unions, other kind of non-state bodies, and that is very worrying, and particularly the way in which student unions are kind of taking the baton from the state and are enforcing their own form of censorship of anything they don't like. Final thing, in relation to free speech as a means of discovering or trying to discover the truth, I think that's very important, and it's a point that John Stuart Mill makes, which is the only way you can be sure that what you're saying is potentially true is by testing it in public debate, subjecting it to ridicule and criticism and discussion and everything else. Otherwise, it's just dogma. If you just believe it because you know it's true, you're just a dogmatist, and I think that's the case with lots of these NUS officials who ban things. Censorship is the midwife of stupidity. It makes you stupid. If you live inside a safe space and no kind of controversial idea or idea that you hate is allowed to enter that safe space, then you are making yourself into an idiot, and you are making yourself dogmatic. The safe space is a bigger trap for the people inside it than it is for the people outside. In the words of Cardinal John Henry Newman, the human intellect does from opposition grow. It's only through exposing yourself to opposition and criticism and abuse and offensiveness and outrage and insults that your own intellect can grow. So the thing that worries me most about students is that they are making themselves dumb. That's the real consequence of censorship. Yeah, I think on incitement to violence, well, it's very difficult to know when hate speech becomes incitement to violence. That's the problem with having these clear boundaries. And I don't think I'm in favour of censoring incitement to violence, because often what it means in the context of where it's happened is, for example, an Islamist praising what happened on 9/11. I think people should have the freedom to praise what happened on 9/11. Or, you know, people's expressing support for Hamas or ISIS or some other repugnant group. I think people should have the right to express support for those groups. And I think it's, you know, Peter Tatchell, I'm a fan of Peter Tatchell. I wrote a piece for The Spectator this week defending his right to freedom of speech. But the last time I had a debate with Peter Tatchell about freedom of speech, he was arguing that Jamaican dance hall singers who sing about killing homosexuals should be banned on the basis that they incite violence, and my argument was they don't incite violence. They sing about, they fantasize about killing homosexuals. That's really different. And also, if you hear a song in a disco and the lyrics go into your mind and you think, oh, now I'm going to go out and kill a homosexual, that's your fault. That's not their fault. So Peter Tatchell, bless him, has been on the wrong side of the debate about freedom of speech a few times, and then he wrote a piece in The Guardian calling me a smug shite for defending freedom of speech for homophobic singers. So I think the lines are difficult to draw, which is why I think we should err on the side of not having any. And it really is important that we take freedom of speech responsibility seriously, because there are two beneficiaries when it comes to freedom of speech. The person who has something to say, whether it's interesting, stupid, racist, clever, whatever, those people must have the right to say what they want to say. But more importantly is the right of the audience to hear them and to judge for yourselves if they are talking rubbish or saying something interesting. If you allow the state or the student unions or someone else to make that decision on your behalf, you are infantilizing yourself. Censorship is bad for people who are being censored, but it's even worse for everyone else, because our moral, intellectual muscles become weak. And it's incumbent upon us to fight for freedom of speech for everyone, so that we can make up our own minds about what's true, what's false, what's good, and what's bad. Yeah, I've been fighting for freedom of speech for racist people for about 22, 23 years, since the first year I went to university. because they tend to be the people who suffer the most censorship on campus and in society. And the mistake some people make, following on from what Mariam said, if you defend freedom of speech for certain people, then that means you must agree with them or think their ideas are acceptable. But the precise opposite is the case. It's precisely because I think their ideas are unacceptable and ugly and hideous that I want them to have freedom of speech. Because I want to know who they are, hear what they think, and stand up to them. There are two problems with hate speech restrictions. The first is that it rebrands what I think to be normal or acceptable ideas as hate speech. For example, Christian ideas, people who are opposed to gay marriage, people who think men are men and women are women, and so on. It rebrands normal thinking as hate speech, but even worse, it is the worst tool, censorship is the worst tool imaginable for challenging genuinely obnoxious, racist, anti-Semitic, misogynistic ideas, because it simply pushes them underground and it deprives us, ordinary people, of the right to challenge them and stand up to them and to argue them down. I love hearing hate speech. I relish it. It makes me feel really good because, firstly, because it reminds me that I live in a society that's so free you can be a disgusting person and say disgusting things. That's a nice thing to be reminded of. And secondly, because then I know who these people are and I know what they think and I can sock it to them. The day we don't hear hate speech is the day we should be worried, because that means we are living in a tyrannical society, and even worse, we have been morally disarmed of the freedom and the right and the responsibility to challenge genuinely horrible people.